about woke tropes and cliches of all kind is you start to see them everywhere because you start to develop this predisposition and expectation of seeing them. And that actually limits your viewing experience or your reading experience, because you start to have a confirmation bias and almost a kind of snide cynicism, and you think, you're too ready to pounce. And that's why we're going to talk about the Barbie movie, because the Barbie movie, in my opinion, actually has woke tropes, but it has subverted a lot of them in a form of satire and acknowledging the limits of those tropes to get actually beyond, which is what we want in storytelling. We want you to take the trope and turn it on its head. And that's what the Barbie movie did. The Barbie movie had a lot of those typical woke tropes, like men are useless. It's a classic one. But it actually made a point about how when we swing the pendulum to making men an accessory in Barbie land, we have hurt, we have pain. And when we make women an accessory to men, that also is swinging the pendulum the other way, where it also causes pain and hurt. And that ideally, the sexes are complementary, and we ought to not have these battle of sexes where we're reducing one sex to an accessory, to an object or a sidekick. And when that happens, we get pain. That is one of the many themes in the Barbie movie. And that's why it has gone, it is a successful example of implementing woke tropes and turning them on their head. Because it's not just operating on an ideological, didactic, trying to prove a thesis. It is taking theses and turning them, flipping them, doing all kinds of work and actual storytelling to show why we can't be caught up in even the words. It makes a great point about getting caught up in even words and concepts like the patriarchy is just a way that we label our discomfort in the real world. And I think that's so brilliant to recognize, because that's kind of why I even started this channel is realizing that we get really caught in assumptions and limitations, and then our art suffers. And so for me, the Barbie movie is a wonderful delight it has that same kind of idea of let's not get caught in assumptions and stereotypes and cliches, and realize that the world is more complex than these simplifications of and these kind of words we attach to things like patriarchy. Let's explore how the patriarchy hurts men, how it hurts women, and how when we swing the pendulum one way or the other because we get resentful, then that just causes more problems. And so, but keep in mind, what people get out of a movie is where they're at. Their perception of what they're seeing is the entire lens for the movie. So like I say, there are people that are predisposed toward a cynicism and a biting, ready to pounce way of viewing the Barbie movie, because they're really fed up with woke tropes to the point where they can't even recognize where we've gone. We've made progress in shifting past the stereotypes. So Ben Shapiro, he was so predisposed toward hating it, and so his review reflected that. Me, I have a bias in the other way, where I was so predisposed toward loving it because I was so excited by the previews that it was going to be, I'm a little more predisposed to seeing it with an open mind and with a mind toward giving it the benefit of the doubt. But what was great was I really enjoyed Michael Knowles' review of it, because he just had through his lens, he had a completely different experience of it than I had, than anybody had. He had a whole kind of realizing that Greta Gerwig's Catholic upbringing and mythical, biblical background had a lot of motifs from that. And I didn't see that because, I come at it from a person that was obsessed with Barbies, playing hard with Barbies. And in Barbie land, when you're playing Barbies, there's not very many kins for sale at the stores, so you generally have them way outnumbered, and you tend to have one kin that you're constantly taping their legs because they're, that you don't have enough kins for the amount of Barbie. So some of the points in the movie are not trying to have a like, we want women to be the overwhelming superior majority, but a lot of the points made are actually just about the actual utilitarian aspect of the toys themselves, and the fact that you can't find different kinds of kins doing different jobs, or just having a kin in general. But let's not go off on that. Let's talk about the woke tropes that are in the Barbie movie, since this is a woke tropes channel. Well, woke tropes, men are useless, as I've said, is a very common woke trope, and the Barbie movie absolutely has that as its assumption for even the tagline of the movie, she's Barbie, he's just kin. So it's reducing the kins to an accessory. They are sidekicks, and they are living for Barbie's attention and approval, and when she doesn't get it, they feel like they have no meaning in life. And so there's a lot of ways you can look at this. You can look at this as the basic fact of Barbie land in general. That's how the toys are. You can look at this as what people imagine they want. They have a kind of idea of what feminism should be, and it should be women in these powerful leadership roles and men being subservient, which all that is taking the patriarchy and flipping it to be the exact opposite genders. So you just cause the same amount of resentment in the sexes, but you're causing resentment among men instead of the women. So again, it's that kind of like, you stole from me, so now I'm going to steal from you. You oppress me, now I'm going to oppress you. Now, that kind of way of looking at reality is often why woke tropes fall short. There's a petulance of just having resentment and wanting to just imitate the exploitive behaviors that were done to you in order to get revenge, which we see this with sexism, we see this with racism. It's just this kind of flip, which isn't productive because, again, it's just imitating the exploitive behaviors you claim to be against, which is the essence of why woke tropes and this kind of ideological resentment as your core motivator is unsuccessful. But anyway, this movie functions on a lot of levels. For me, I'm not really always in the idea of it being feminism versus patriarchy. For me, it's also about actually living in an imaginary world with your Barbies. You might call it Barbie land. Everyone is leaders, everything's great. Men are accessories to you. Like, that's just a fantasy world, that's typical. But then when you have to go to the real world, those fantasies and that perfection of that world falls apart, just like that classic saying of, in theory that's great, but in practice does it work? So to me, this is actually about growing up. So when you're a child and you're in Barbie land, things are very either or and simple. You have all the Barbies being in leadership positions, but in reality, leading can be stressful, and in reality, you won't have good days every day, right? So the whole premise of the Barbie movie is she's in Barbie land, but she starts to have an existential crisis in terms of, she just suddenly thinks about death, and then everybody's like, what? What are you doing? Like, the program gets messed up in her, that she's no longer in that lobotomized Pollyanna mindset. She suddenly is thinking about death. She gets, her feet go from being up to being flat, and that's a sign that she's not perfect. We get this idea of she's getting cellulite, she's worried. So she basically is having what Adam and Eve have when they have the fruit, like the knowledge of good and evil, or a self-consciousness, which to me that's why it operates on so many levels. It's the human experience. You know, when we grow up, we always note, when girls grow up, they often note when they stopped playing with Barbies and they started worrying about their body, when they got that first inkling of being self-conscious of being fat. Usually their mom says something like, well, don't ever gain weight past this, or you look good now, but don't gain weight. Oh, your thighs are this. Like, I know that's how so many women, girls, they will separate the exact moment that they realized that they were no longer able to just be kind of a free kid in the world. They had some kind of comment about their appearance, and then they suddenly they got into a contracted energy of feeling self-conscious. And then they remember very clearly how they were when they were just playing. They weren't even thinking like that. They were just in an imaginary world having fun. So for me, when she's having that, it's that moment when a little girl stops playing and then is going to the real world. So she goes, she even says when they offer the shoe, she's like, oh, I don't want to go, I don't want to know the truth about the world. I just want to play. So that's exactly you have to go to the real world, and you got to leave behind Barbie land. Like, yes, Barbie land is fun, it's predictable, you can control it. You can control your play, and you can control all these dolls, and there's an element of feeling safe there, but it's not the real world, and you cannot stay a child forever. You must grow up. So Barbie goes into the real world, and Ken comes, and so Ken realizes in the real world that men are respected in the real world, and that he starts reading actually the feminist ideology about the patriarchy that's always attributing that men have so much power, and he thinks, wow, I could have a lot of power. But, you know, he tries to get jobs without a degree and he can't. So, but he realizes, but he's having an epiphany of his own that he's going to bring the patriarchy to Barbie land. So he's going to swing the pendulum back from this matriarchy that has men as an accessory and object to making women the accessory, which is a pretty common, isn't that what always happens, is people who are oppressed become the oppressor, and they have swung the pendulum. They haven't learned that actually I'm just creating the same problem, just reversing it. Anyway, so this movie is very much, it centers on battle of the sexes, and it centers on that pendulum swing, and it makes a beautiful point of wanting to give the Kens that voice, autonomy, and not be making them an accessory, but also not be making Barbie an accessory of men, making it so that men and women live in a complementary world where they are not reduced to being a sidekick of the other. And of course, there are so many more points to it, but to me, it is what a lot of people are missing is really, it is actually about people playing with Barbies. They're in Barbie land. They live in that imaginary world. They have to go to the real world. And just like somebody said, change is part of life. So it's kind of actually a coming of age about that. It marks that point, and it marks this kind of idea of how we theorize and we make a utopia out of these concepts. Like, we make a feminist utopia, but nothing in there that's going to hurt people, and a patriarchy utopia that's going to hurt people. And we need to realize that this kind of child petulance and making these terms, it actually really causes a lot of pain. And the real world is complex. There's multivariables to why things happen. It's not just a simplified view of the world where it's either or. Like, it's a beautiful movie because it has that feel-good camp quality, and it has some depth. And there are people that it's like everyone that watches it gets something out of it in a different way. And so for me, I focused on in this review, I kind of had a lot of that when you suddenly get to that point where you're self-conscious and you were scared and worried, where you were never worried, you were playful, you were in Barbie land living in your imagination, and people keep encouraging you to follow these rules that don't make sense, but you just want to go back to your fantasy land, right? Because it doesn't change and you have control over it. And then eventually you become a writer if you want to stay in fantasy land and that creative, having that creative control. So I think that what's great about it is it subverts a lot of the expectations of woke tropes by making the point that when we have the idea that men are useless, we get men that are they are in pain, but moreover, they are not in their best self. They are in a kind of retracted simp slave energy that isn't even attracting the Barbies, you know. And same with women, when they're just kind of an accessory reduced to sex or a kind of slave role, well then they're not in their best. Neither of them are brought out to their true dimensional humanness, right? And what was also great about this is a spoiler, so if you want to watch the movie, don't watch this further. So what I really liked about the woke trope at the very end, the woke trope, we expect that when she's decided to become a doll, become a human, go to the real world. So she's chosen to not live in feminist utopia, but she's chosen to live in the world that has just the qualities of, it's not going to be perfect and controllable, but it's going to be real and truth. Choosing truth over the fantasy. So she's chosen that, and they have it built up that it's going to be like, she seems like she's going to put on her professional clothes and probably go get a job, because we're so used to that. That's the trope, is that a woman is going to become a boss babe in the city. That's always the direction it goes. That's the trope of, this job is going to be much better than serving a husband, or this job is going to be following my dreams in girl boss land. But what she actually is doing, and the whole joke in the last line of the movie is, she says, I'm going to go to the gynecologist. And this is a joke because, of course, she's a Barbie doll, and so the joke, of course, about having parts is one. Then there's the fact that, well, she has to because she's a human now, so you're going to have parts. But then there's a more subtle indication that she may want to have children. So that is, what this is saying is, it's okay if you don't want to be a boss babe, but you want to have children as a woman. And it's a kind of a point that goes against every single woke trope, which is, most woke tropes are, you always want to choose yourself and your job over this baby and husband life, because that's what it's reacting to. It's reacting to that former world where that was what all women did. And even at the beginning, the reason why Barbies were created were to have a doll that did other things besides be a baby doll that a little girl played as her mom to the baby doll. So it birthed this idea of being a career woman. So, but this is a great point of having the Barbie say, well, actually though, I also want to be able to choose to be a mother, and that is also a beautiful thing to choose. And so that it's making a point and completely subverting the woke trope of, which always shows like that Mary Tyler Moore going to get the job. It has completely shifted into motherhood is okay, which goes against, it really does go against the culture, because mostly everything tells us it's in an indirect way, of course, but most things are always telling us that that's not the priority, to the point where people feel guilty for admitting they want children, I notice. But then at the same time, I think it's really great to not be limited by this idea that you must have children, but also to not be limited by the idea that you must have career, but to realize that you should have the choice. And you should not have these ideological battles where people are even involved in telling you who to be and what to do. Anyway, so that's what was the ultimate subversion of woke tropes, was that end, because it it played off of your expectation of her feeling so complete in going in getting beyond that the womanhood expectations to get a job. They show that so ad nauseum. So it was really refreshing to have that turned on its head. Anyway, you should definitely see the Barbie movie. There's so much to love about it. It has a feeling of kind of whimsy and a feeling of that feel-good camp and a bit of satire. It really pokes at a lot of cultural expectations and norms, and so I think you'll really enjoy it. It's an example of us getting past woke tropes and turning the woke tropes on their heads, so it is absolutely marvelous.